Super duper. All right. So, welcome to our
Leave
replay
now.
series.
Yes, come
Just going to come out of here and mute everybody again because somebody has come off of mute. Okay. Right. So, speech sounds. How do we make them? How do we describe them? And what is typical development? Okay, so there's a lot to pack in. As I said before, this was 3 separate webinars, and I've now condensed it all down into one. So, housekeeping rules very quickly. Cameras on or off, it really doesn't matter. It is the evening time, so we're all feeling a bit evening. But please do keep yourselves on mute at all times, unless you are contributing at the end, where I will throw open the virtual floor and you can shout out some questions and we can have a chit chat about any concerns that you have. Any questions, do please type them into the chat box as you go. I won't answer them as I'm going through, but I will review them at the end. So if you're anything like me and you think, oh, I've got a question, but I won't remember that till the end, ping it in the chat box and we'll have a look later. Do come and go as you need. Certainly I've got kids and pets at home and you guys may be the same. So if you need to go and attend to them, that's absolutely fine. And as you know, this is all going onto YouTube. So you'll be able to watch it again another time. Slides will be emailed to you on receipt of your feedback form. So as soon as you've sent us your feedback form and we've processed that, the slides will come to you. So again, don't feel you have to make too many notes. As ever, these webinars are hosted by your Reach Out Early Years Stronger Practice Hub team, consisting of Damon, Victoria, Jess, and Lisa. Tonight, Damon, as usual, is my wingman. So thank you to him for coming on this evening. Stronger Practice Hubs originally were part of the early years COVID-19 recovery catch-up program, but since then they have evolved into regional networks that are supporting children's outcomes across the curriculum, particularly closing the gap between the sort of more advantaged and disadvantaged children. There are 18 Stronger Practice Hubs across the UK, and our lovely hub is based at the Barn Nursery School in Greenstead Green. One thing that you can always look on is the Early Years Evidence Store, which is an online resource which looks at all the current evidence for all aspects of the early years foundation stage. So obviously, if you're a new practitioner, you're going to want all the knowledge first time round. If you're a more experienced practitioner, always good to check in and make sure that what you're doing is backed by current evidence and that nothing has changed. And I do it this way because I've always done it this way, just sort of doesn't really cut it anymore now that we are in this more evidence-based practice. Okay, so let's have a think then about speech sounds. So, what is phonology? Phonology is how sounds are put together and how they function in a particular language or across languages. And basically, it is the sound system. It's why certain sounds can go together and certain sounds can't go together. So, in language, you might see a r and an a together, but you would never see, I don't know, a W followed by an L. That just doesn't work in English, whereas it might work in other languages. So phonology is kind of how the sounds fit together. And phonological development is something that we all go through where we learn how to form, combine, and use our speech sounds just to communicate in our language. So babies learn speech sounds systematically and it's in a fairly consistent order, whatever the language. So the theory is that we are all primed. If you imagine a brain as a great big sort of set of switches for each speech sound, and every switch is switched to on. So a baby has the potential to use and learn every single speech sound that there ever is. But if they don't hear those sounds in the early part of their life, that switch then gets switched off by the brain. And you only keep the ones that you have been exposed to. So the implication of that is as an adult or an older child, if you try and learn a language that has got other sounds in that aren't part of your home language, that becomes very difficult. Also, if you have a hearing loss and you miss those sounds first time round, they are incredibly difficult to acquire. The other things that influence a child's development of a normal sound system are their growing oral physiology. So their growing mouth, their growing tongue, their teeth falling in and out, all of that sort of thing. Hearing, listening, and attention. If you can't hear a sound or if you can't concentrate on a sound for long enough, you are not going to be able to say it. Sucking and feeding. So when I'm doing a case history in a speech and language assessment, I always ask whether there have been any problems with feeding, because we use the same muscles to suck and feed as we do to speak. So if I've got a child whose speech isn't right and the parent says, oh yes, they only eat yogurts and mashed potato, but they can't chew meat or something, I'll be thinking, well, what's going on with these muscles then? And that can sometimes be a clue. The complexity of the movement required in the mouth. So some things are just easier to say than others, and some combinations are tougher. And also the opportunity to play and practice making sounds. So by that, I mean, do they have a dummy in their mouth all the time? And are they able to babble happily, or is that dummy always in the way? Big scary graph, don't worry, or diagram, no test at the end. But we call the bits in our mouth that we use to make sounds the articulators. Now, some of them move and some of them don't, but we use them in combination to make sounds. So the tongue, obviously, we know is very active, moving all around our mouth. Our teeth, they don't move, but when you're little, actually, they do get a bit wobbly and then they fall out, and that can affect things. Our lips obviously move, and our palate, so the roof of our mouth, we have the hard palate, which is the bit that you can feel the roof of your mouth with the bone, and then the soft palate, which is the bit at the back. Now that does move up and down, and that's what controls our nasal sounds. So the and sounds, those sounds that you can't make when you've got a cold because they're coming out through the nose. That's all controlled by our soft palate moving up and down. So we need to think how these change as a child grows, what can go wrong, and then how the changes can affect speech. Now, this is a really interesting slide. I think it takes you by surprise the first time, but these are your vocal cords, okay? And your vocal cords basically open and close and vibrate as we are making speech sounds. So our vocal cords will close and vibrate for certain sounds and stay completely open for others. So if we take the word, or if we take the sound B and the sound P, I'm doing the same thing with my lips. I'm still going B and P. But the difference is if you put your hand on your voice box and go B, 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 you will feel it vibrate. If you say P, 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 nothing happens. And that's because with the P, 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 your voice box, your larynx is staying open and the air is just going through it. When you go B, 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 those vocal cords are vibrating and you can feel that here. So that is sometimes children sometimes have what we call a voicing error, where they voice things that shouldn't be voiced or vice versa. So there are a lot of things going on when we are learning to speak. You may see in dictionaries that you have the word and then you have it all written in funny little symbols. You may have noticed that. That's called the International Phonetic Alphabet. Speech and language therapists are trained to write in this. So this has a sound, a symbol for every single sound that can possibly be humanly made at all. And we have to learn these as part of our degree, basically. And then you also have the added fun of having all of these little, we call them diacritics, these little symbols that you can use as well as all of those other symbols. And then basically you could write sentences. So as part of our training, because we didn't, oh, this is really bad, because we didn't really have the internet back when I trained, and not everybody had the internet, we used to write letters, actual real letters to each other in the International Phonetic Alphabet to learn how to use this stuff. So actually, if ever you see a speech and language therapist doing something like this is a child's speech sound assessment and writing in all these symbols. This is basically so that I can absolutely know, and any other speech therapist can know exactly what that child was saying during their assessment. So these are just really out of interest for you. In terms of speech sound development, now, word of warning, there are hundreds of lovely graphs and colourful sort of schemas online with wildly differing norms for speech sound development. Be careful when you are looking at these online. Just because it looks nice doesn't mean it's actually going to be the right information. Now, this speech sound norms table is actually worth it because it's been taken from a lot of norms from the Goldman-Fristow test of articulation, which is actually one of the excuse me, one of the sort of key articulation tests. So you can trust this. But what's interesting about this is look at some of these things. Some of these things don't actually become acquired until the ages of 6 and 7. So it's worth keeping that in mind. We're not expecting children to have perfect speech by the age of 3 or 4. It does continue to develop well into school age. Also, these speech sound development things, well, they just don't happen that easily. Why doesn't that surprise us? There's always bumps along the road. So normal phonological processes. So all children go through certain processes in their speech which are part of normal development. Okay. And what happens when a child comes to the speech and language therapist is we will go, yes, this is all normal, or no, there are some atypical things. And this is what I'm going to show you now. So, a phonological process is a pattern of errors that typically developing children use as they learn to talk. Okay. And they use it to make things more simple, which is fine. Quite frankly, they've got enough to do at the age of 2, 3, or 4. They're still learning to coordinate all of those articulators that I spoke about before. And so they make complex words more simple, but how they do it is predictable, it is consistent. So, for example, we've all seen children go nana instead of banana, okay? And butterfly instead of butterfly. That is completely normal. We also see them reduce their consonant clusters. So when you get two consonants together, we call that a cluster, and they will often reduce those down. So plain might become pain because pl is a little bit tricky to say when you're little. Now, these are considered normal until children would usually stop using them. So if a child is doing these things and it is still within that window of acceptability, I wouldn't do any therapy unless there's lots of stuff occurring all together that is really making them hard to understand. But my job is to tease apart what's normal and what's not, and how much of it is happening, and is it an acceptable amount, or actually, do we need to do some things? This is an absolutely gorgeous visual on normal, typical phonological processes. It's quite small, so I've split it, I've made it bigger and split it. So up until the age of 3, it's absolutely fine for a child to be devoicing. So do you remember I said some sounds are exactly the same? It's just whether we open or close these vocal folds. So pick instead of pig is absolutely fine until you're about 3. Assimilation is where you actually use the start and the end sound the same. So instead of bus, you'd have bub. That's quite usual until the age of 3. And final consonant deletion is something I see so much of, but it's persisted well past 3. So they'll be saying ka instead of cup, ca instead of cat, ba instead of bus. So it's really, really typical unless you're, a lot older than 3. Fronting is when all of our sounds that are produced down here at the back, k and g, are produced as t and d. So instead of go, we'd have dough. You might have, instead of gate, you'd have date. Um, Stopping. So again, this is where if you go back to the original webinars that I did, you'll have a little bit more of an idea of what some of these are. This is where instead of a hissy sound like th or s, we use a quick sound. So instead of fan, we'd have pan, or instead of zoo, we'd have do. Now, again, up until about 3.5, absolutely fine. If it persists beyond then, they're going to need a nudge. So this syllable deletion, weak syllable deletion, which I've talked about. So nana for banana, again, absolutely fine until you're about 4. Those reducing those clusters down, so pl to p or fr to f, absolutely fine until 4. Deaffrication is a big word. So the sounds ch and j are called our affricate sounds. And sometimes the children just make those a little bit more short and sharp. So it'd be tutu instead of choo choo. Absolutely fine till you're 4. And again, very similarly, T's for cheese or tip for ship. So making those ch and sh sounds a lot shorter. Again, fine till the age of 4.5. This is a really common one that people get really, really worried about, but actually we would expect it till around about 5. Confusing our was, lus, rus, r. Oh, hang on. L, w, r, and y. Those 4 get confused all the time. So you might hear white instead of light, or right instead of light, or wing instead of ring, or wyan instead of lion, or lello instead of yellow. All of those things are fine, okay? And the other one, thumb instead of thumb, or path instead of path. It's not lazy. I remember my mum telling me off for this so much. Don't be lazy with your speech, Rebecca. When I was saying thumb instead of thumb, it's not lazy. It's actually quite typical until you're 6. So here, I love this. It is a little bit blurry. It's not your eyes, it's the slide. This is how you may expect some common words to develop over time. So for example, if we think about all those processes I've just talked about, at the age of 1, a child might say for snake, nay, then it turns into nate, then nake, then another year at nake, and then snake. So again, if we look at elephant, we might have ebba, ebon, ebont, elephant, and then elephant. And all of these stages are absolutely okay. All right. So this is what I mean. There are predictable immaturities in a young child's speech that are absolutely fine. Okay. As a rough marker, by the age of 1, we'd expect 25% intelligibility. So how much of a child's speech can we understand? About 25% by the age of 1, about half of it by the age of 2, 3/4 by the age of 3, and 100% by the age of 4. Now, that does not mean everything is perfect. It means you can understand it. So if you hear a child going, I want a sandwich, you know that sandwich is sandwich, don't you? So that is intelligible. It's not perfect, but we can understand it. So that is what you're thinking about. So by the age of 4, you should be able to understand everything a child says, but with some immaturities. So those are the predictable speech sound processes. Now we're going to go on to the atypical ones, the ones that if you encounter any of these, get your speech and language referral in now because you will need one. So we've talked about final consonant deletion, where a child will delete the final sound of a word. So cup becomes ka, cat becomes ka. If they are ever deleting the first consonant in a sound, that is extremely atypical. So in 20 years, I've only worked with 2 children that do this. It's really, really unusual, and it's a real tricky one to work on. Can be worked on. It was fine. Both children were fine in the end, but it is very, very unusual. So if you have a child doing that, it will sound really weird. And you'll just be going, what is this? Why is this sounding so strange? But if you sit and you carefully jot down what they're saying, you'll soon notice the pattern. And if you do, it's straight away speech and language referral. Again, if we're missing the middle sounds in a word, very, very unusual. I haven't actually worked with a child who does this. So instead of spider, it would be spire, or donkey would be doy, or lighter would be liar, or feather would be fair. Okay, so if anything like that is happening, very unusual. Backing. So I talked about fronting, didn't I? Where our back sounds, k and g, which are both produced down here, down by our vocal cords, come out as fronted sounds, t and d. So t and d, if you say t and you say d, you'll notice that your tongue is up behind your top teeth and we let it go. So it's all produced at the front. All the activity is here. And then with back sounds, it's all back here. Now, backing is the opposite. So it's where t and d come out as a k and a g. So day would be gay, tall would be cool, side would be side, time would be kime, daddy would be gaggy. So you get this very, very clear sort of pattern to the speech. It'll be gaggy, I want to go to the park now. For daddy, I want to go to the park now. I wonder if anybody can think of a common reason that a child may present with backing. One, two, three, dummies. So dummies are classic causation of backing because basically when you're sucking on a dummy, your tongue can't reach the front of your mouth. It doesn't do all of the front of the mouth stuff and it has a very back quality to it. If you put your thumb in your mouth and you try and talk, you'll sound like you've got a dummy in and you will sound like you're backing. So very often in my first ever speech sound clinic, sort of 20 odd years ago, I had a child come in backing and I was like, does your child have a dummy? And they said yes. And I was like, how often? And they were like, most of the time. I was like, well, get rid of it and come back in 3 months. And lo and behold, everything was sort of starting to resolve itself. So if you hear that quality and you know there's a dummy at play, child would still probably benefit from speech and language therapy because they're going to need a nudge to get all of that up and running in a timely manner. But it's likely that the removal of the dummy will be really, really helpful. Migration is a really rare one. And again, I worked with a child who had initial consonant deletion and migration. It was a wild ride. That's where sounds in a word, they're there, but they move somewhere completely random in the word. So soap might be opes, fish might be ifsh, candle might be andalk, or bowl might be olb. So it sounds incredibly strange. And I think if you're a practitioner who's been going for a long time, you'll be able to go, that child's speech sounds kind of just immature in a typical way, or you get an ear for that just sounds really weird. And I'm not saying you have to make the referral going, I've done my homework and they're doing migration and initial consonant deletion. You don't have to do that job. That's my job. But it's a really, really useful thing just to listen to stuff and go, it's just not right. Now, glottal replacements. Now in some accents, like mine and possibly a lot of yours, let's be honest, are Essex contingent. Glottal replacement is really usual. So you might replace the t sound with a kind of a sound. So like letter, butter, carpet, fidget, setback, fitness, Latvia, clipboard, background. You notice I'm not actually saying any of those sounds in red. I'm actually just replacing it with a little sort of a sound. So again, very often with children, I work on the word carpet because they sit on the carpet a lot, don't they, little children? But I have to be really careful because if I teach them to say carpet, they're actually going to sound like Mary Poppins when actually that's not their accent at all. So if it's part of your accent to go carpet, that's absolutely fine. Don't try and put a t there if there doesn't need to be one. Okay. But there are some sounds that would never, 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 never be replaced with a glottal stop. So it either doesn't sound right or it's just really difficult. So like hammer, you wouldn't ever go it's just you just wouldn't. Rubber, it's just not something we would do. Lego, let-o, or jacket, jacket. It's just not right or it's really hard to do. So if you've got a child who's putting these little in really strange places, so letter, fine. Hatter for hammer, not fine. Okay, again, it's just going to sound really, really sort of staccato and sort of but, and you'll go, this doesn't sound right. The other one that is atypical is sound preference substitution. So that is where a child replaces most sounds with one sound. So I've had children who do it with duh. So they might go, Daddy, die, don't, do, 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 dark now. For Daddy, I want to go to the park now. Or they might do it with a nut. I've had nanny, I, non, no, 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 nark now. So if you've got one child replacing lots and lots of letters with, or lots and lots of sounds rather, with just one, that is another referral. The other thing you need to be, or that I need to be aware of, is that with all of these that we've talked about, whether they're typical or atypical, they assume that everything is happening consistently. So the same errors are made in a consistent manner. Now, inconsistent speech, so if a child is repeating one word in lots of different ways, that can be an indication of developmental verbal dyspraxia. Now, this is a condition where the brain has real difficulty coordinating the correct muscles to produce speech sounds. Okay, so if you've got a child and you say monkey, and they go monkey, dumpy, punkty, or something like that, and it's different every single time, this always requires specialist intervention. Okay, so it might be that it needs to be a real specialist speech and language therapist who works with children who are dyspraxic, because there are ways of doing it with a dyspraxic child that you may not with a child who's doing things consistently. So if you notice that, again, that's a real sort of urgent speech and language referral. Another time speech and language therapists may intervene is when if there are lots of typical things happening that are having a significant impact on intelligibility and confidence. So sometimes multiple processes occur in one sentence. So I've had a child before who was doing all these things were typical, but they were all happening. So he not have his umbrella was he not ha he hawa. Okay. So there was a bit of consonant, there was a bit of syllable deletion, there was a bit of final consonant deletion, there was a bit of everything. And the combination of that was quite catastrophic for this child. Well, children have an umbrella was chiwi habawaya. Now that you can't understand. So if there are lots and lots of typical processes happening, but there's too many of them, that can be a problem. Now, if there are also accompanying feeding difficulties, I might intervene, and also where there is a coexisting hearing loss. So you're always looking at the whole pattern with these children. Right. So you've identified that your child has got something going on, and you've started to make some sort of theories about what may be happening. While you wait for that speech language referral to come through, what can you be doing? So this is the bit you're all probably super interested in. So what you're going to work on, rather than picking a specific sound, is phonological awareness. Now, phonological awareness is the ability to kind of recognize and manipulate parts of words. So we're thinking syllables, we're thinking that onset and the main part of the word, and phonemes, which are speech sounds. And phonological awareness is the ability to kind of play around with sounds, okay, which I'll go into in a minute. So don't panic if you're going, what? So recognizing different sounds and parts of words then leads to the ability for children to manipulate them. It gets children listening and gets children thinking. And what they eventually do, if you work on phonological awareness, is they start to go, hang on a minute, my speech doesn't sound like their speech. So I need to do something here. And so that's why these are key. You may not think they're going to do anything, but they are really, really useful. So phonological awareness, the umbrella of that is things about being aware of words, being aware of sounds, being aware of syllables, being aware of rhymes, being aware of first sounds and being aware of that kind of alliteration, which is where we have, I don't know, the kooky cat cooks cookies, where you have all sounds together. Now, actually, the early evidence store that I talked about at the start has actually got some really good phonological awareness stuff in their literacy section, because often phonological awareness is really heavily linked to literacy, but it is also heavily linked to children's speech production as well. And that talks all about the different things that children need to do successfully to be able then to do early reading. So there's a lovely sort of bit here. In order to read fluently, children need to develop a good understanding of how sounds combine together to make up words, beginning with the development of phonological awareness. So there's, strong evidence that phonological awareness in preschoolers is strongly related to their later ability to read fluently. So this is really important for all children. So that's the other thing to say. If you're working on phonological awareness with one child in your setting, work on it with all of the children in your setting, because it is going to do them all good. Okay, so go on to the early years evidence store and read that, because it is useful. So the impact of if a child has got phonological awareness difficulties is unclear speech, which we've talked about. It can be actually difficulty in hearing and understanding other people's messages clearly and correctly, and discriminating between certain sounds. It can be hugely tricky for these children because they're miscommunicating, because a lot of sounds they say, a lot of words they say all sound the same. They'll have difficulties with literacy and reading, difficulty with making and maintaining friendships. They're going to need more time to formulate a response. They get frustrated. Their self-esteem drops, and you've got a really, really big problem. Okay. So these phonological awareness difficulties, they cause speech sound disorders in children, because if children can't hear or think about the differences between units of sound, they're unable to produce them correctly. So they can't hear, or they don't understand what they're doing wrong in their speech, so they can't change it. And this is where the power of listening to stuff actually really comes in. So before you even think, though, about what do I work on with these children, you need to think about, okay, I've got a child who comes up to me, she's got a lot to say, but I just can't understand it. What do you do? So Worcestershire Speech and Language Therapy put this together, and it's lovely. So don't pretend you don't understand. Okay, so don't pretend you do understand when you don't. Okay, they'll know. So I always put the blame on myself. I go, do you know what? I'm really sorry. I'm so old that my ears are old and I don't always hear. So could you say it again? Okay. Be sympathetic. So yeah, just take some of the blame. Ask a child if they can show you what they mean. So either can they draw it, can they point to it, can they take you to it? Always go back to the last thing you understood. So if you go, look, I know that you want something, but I just can't get that word of what you want, because at least then you're saying, I'm part of the way and I'm invested and I'm not leaving you. I want to help you work through this. If you still can't understand, say sorry and suggest you talk to mummy. So, and have a little conversation and go, oh, Toby was asking for something, but I couldn't work out what it was. It sounded like this. Do you know what that might mean? And sometimes you can sort of use a communication book to and from, just to give you something to hinge on, where the parent might go, oh, they enjoyed doing this the other day. They might talk about it, because at least you've got a starting point. So before you start on speech sounds, so it's very likely that your speech and language therapist will tell you what speech sounds to work on. But while you're waiting for that, it's really nice to work on just general listening stuff that isn't speech and language. We need to teach children to listen. So we know children can hear, but we need to teach them to listen, and that's something different. So rhythm games are lovely. So sort of clapping and tapping out rhythms, or stomping our feet to the beat. Animal sounds, so listening to an animal sound and then matching it to the correct picture, they're lovely. Environmental sounds, I don't think a lot of attention or enough attention is put onto environmental sounds. So you can walk around your setting, flush the toilet, run the taps. If you're in a childminder setting, turn the shower on. Um, all sorts. Listen to the washing machine, and just give those sounds some names, some labels. Is it a fizzy sound? Is it a hissy sound? Is it a sharp sound? Is it a bubbly sound? Get the children really thinking about what they're hearing. And even just things like musical statues. So when the sound is on, I do something, and when the sound isn't there, I stop. So all of these things are just getting children used to listening, and they're lovely. Starting to work on intelligibility all hinges on that phonological awareness. And the biggest one to start with is syllables. Now, if you've ever worked with me before, you know I bang on about syllables all the time. It's because it is the quickest fix to making a child intelligible. Okay. So syllables are the number of beats in words. I'm sure you know that. So cat, apple, zebra, banana. And that's all you need. I googled what is a syllable. My goodness, look at all of this. For the purposes of interventions in the early years, you just do beats in a word. Please don't get bogged down in 7 types of syllable. I've been doing this for 20 years. I didn't know there were 7 types of syllable. So just just go beats in a word. So syllable number is helpful because, for example, a child who is just saying one syllable for everything, ball, balloon, and blanket may just sound like ba, ba, and ba. So there you've got like 3 words that all sound exactly the same. If you work on syllables, you might then have ball is ba, balloon is ba-oo, and blanket is ba-ee. Now that is going to be much easier for a listener to understand. I want a ba-oo. We will fill in the gaps as an adult and go, do you know, it's either a balloon or a baboon, and we are in an early year setting, so it's probably going to be a balloon. Yeah. I want a batty. Now, black batty kind of doesn't sound too, if you can use your context clues and it's nap time, you're probably going to know that's blanket. If it's just ba, it could be anything. So, good ways to do this in settings. Always, when you're doing Who's Here Today or your version of the register, clap everybody's syllables in their name. It costs you no time whatsoever. Everybody can do it. Nobody is singled out. Whole setting approach. That is the easiest way to do it. Always think about your vocabulary. So use your vocabulary from the current book you're reading. So I'm talking about things like grapher low, I've forgotten the book, deep dark wood, that kind of thing. Use words around your seasons, any current affairs or celebrations. So Christmas is coming up. That's an absolutely golden time to work on syllables. There are so many lovely things. Christmas, Christmas tree, bauble, candy cane, naughty elf. Brilliant. Play-Doh is an absolute game changer for working on syllables because they love to squash the balls as they say the words. So this is fantastic. So get your Play-Doh out and get squishing because it's a really good visual reinforcer of how many syllables there are in words. Get your musical instruments out, tap, shake, bang your syllables, anything to make it a little bit more fun. Clapping costs nothing and everyone can do it, so please do even just go for clapping syllables. You can make it physical. Kids absolutely love bouncing syllables, so you can bounce them on a space hopper or a gym ball. Frogs on lily pads is an absolute classic as well, so you jump across the lily pads for how many syllables there are. I've got dinosaur feet that I use in my setting, where we stomp the syllables out. So anything like that. So you can do this so many different ways. The other benefits on working on syllables, as I say, it develops phonological awareness for everyone, and that leads to better reading and spelling. And children, as I said, they begin to subconsciously monitor their own speaking and they start to go, hang on, if I say buffy and she says butterfly, I can count the syllables now, and I know that butterfly is not the same as butterfly. So I might go butterfly, and then all of a sudden that sounds a lot clearer to us as the grown up. So they're going to start to spontaneously remediate their errors, okay? In some cases, not all. Okay, and there's not a lot of research for that, but I've most of us have seen it happen. Rhyming is really good fun as well, and that's another one that really helps children, particularly who are those ones who are taking off the last consonant in a word. That is really good for them. So working on all of your rhyming games, this is where the Julia Donaldson books come in. So you can do that. One that's really nice for your preschool rooms is where children have partner cards. So one person has got king, and then they have to go around the room and try and find the person who has the rhyming card with them. That's really good. A rhyming basket where you put pairs of words that rhyme in a basket, and the children have to sort them into their rhyming pairs. Preschool room, they're always mucking about with names. So there's books like Amelia Bedelia. So we had one in my younger daughter's year, Jonah, and they all called him Jonah Boner, and we had to spend a lot of time not laughing about that. Slug in a Jug is a fantastic Orchard Toys game that you've got a lot of mileage for rhyming in there as well if you're short on time to prepare anything. Know that working on speech with a child with a speech disorder is hard. It's really hard. It's really, really hard. So if you think about the thing that you find the hardest and how it makes you feel when someone's going, try it again, try it again, try it again, try it again. How long do you take to get frustrated? It doesn't take me very long, and it takes these children even less long. So if your child has been tasked to produce certain speech sounds by a speech therapist, and they are finding it difficult, please do not underestimate how useful the listening tasks are. I would rather you were doing listening than nothing. Listening can be incredibly powerful for these children. So if they're having trouble saying it, just go into listening. Minimal pairs are great. So minimal pairs are words that sound almost the same, but they differ in just one sound. So light and white, wing and ring. If your child is working on a particular speech sound, your speech language therapist will probably have given you some minimal pairs to work on. And actually, for that child, just listening and pointing to the right one can be really, really powerful again. And them going, well, hang on, when I say it, it sounds the same both times. I need to change something. And they might not be able to change it quite right, but they might be able to start making a little bit of a difference, which is a huge thing. If a child is missing the ends from words, try working on words that have the presence or absence of the final sound. So moo versus moon, pie versus pine, buy versus bike, bee versus beat. So suddenly children are going, oh, that word is different because it's got an extra sound on the end. When I say it, it sounds the same both times. I need to put something on the end. Right, 45 minutes in and we've come to the end. So if you're still here, well done. Coming up next, 3rd of December and repeated on the 9th of December, Letters to Santa, top toys for speech and language development. I thought I'd do something Christmassy this year. And for the replay on the 16th of December, we are doing glue ear because 'tis the season for gunked up ears, and you're going to want to know what to do with your children with glue ear.